what we were building was so fundamentally different in terms of tech and the way it works and the way the user navigates in the software. Not in the core idea, the very core idea of web stories as a format remained the same, but pretty much everything around it changed. And
was it a rebrand, also kind of redo of your product idea? So is it like a complete?
This is a really good time to leave the past behind us, indicate at the same time, to our clients and to the future that this is a huge change, that this is something that we really take serious, and that we have really taken huge efforts here to provide the best tool out there. First fuck up I mentioned briefly before, we decided to build our first product as a desktop version. In hindsight, this was a terrible decision and cost us a lot of money.
BotTalk podcast.
Philipp, hi, nice to have you on our podcast. Philipp is a founder of Zazu, Forbes 30 under 30, I'm reading on LinkedIn, and overall you have a really huge history of founding startups, I think, a serial entrepreneur. It will be great to talk about Zazu and the idea and maybe your background. Maybe first of all introduce yourself and kind of a small background of who you are, when you came to this idea of Zazu and what it is.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. Happy to exchange thoughts with you and talk a little bit about my learnings, my journey, and maybe what I did right and what I did wrong, especially. If that helps anyone, I'm happy. I'm Philipp. I'm the co-founder of Zazu, previously known as Cutnut. We actually had also just last year a rebranding as part of our journey, which was very challenging in itself. My background is a bit more business focused, business and strategy focused. So I did a bachelor's degree in business in Spain, and then I worked a bit as a consultant for KPMG as well, and did some consulting efforts. And then ultimately, I founded now Zazu as my passion project back then, and now as an actual company. Really happy with the journey that we've taken. Basically, what we do here at Zazu is we try to find the sweet spot between Instagram stories as a format and Google SEO, so search engine optimizations. And we do that by providing a format that is called web stories. That's exactly how it sounds like. It's basically Instagram stories for the web that allow you to index your content in Google search results. So why do we do this? Because we believe that the format stories is a mobile first format that is incredibly appealing to younger audiences and older audiences alike. It's very simple to understand. It's grown to be one of the most successful formats on social media, and we're helping companies now establish this success of this format outside of their social media boundaries. So their own website, on their newsletter, mobile apps, anywhere really where they're wanting to display immersive content. And the beauty of this is, again, not only are we visualizing the content for them with the editor that we provide, but this content is also helping them actually improve their search results and help to generate new traffic through search engines like Google. And maybe to round it off, we've been around for quite some while. As I mentioned before, it was called Cutnut. We've had this rebranding now, and it's overall, as with most startups, I would say almost as with any startup, it's a journey up and down. Obviously, there's a lot of amazing achievements that you portray outwards, and then there is a lot of failures and struggles that you might not as obviously show to everybody else, but that are definitely there. And I would say they also outweigh to a large degree some of the beautiful things that the public sees, but nonetheless a journey that I would recommend to anybody. And it's an amazing journey, as you probably yourself can tell.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll dive into that and maybe some ups and downs. Before that, I just want to ask some general question about the product to understand who is your ideal customer, who is your so basically who is paying you money to use what exactly?
Yeah. So expanding a bit on what I just said, essentially what we are offering is like from a service perspective is this web story format, but the actual product Zazu is a story editor. So it's a website. It's an application where you can then design and create your own stories. You can, insert your own images, pictures. You can customize fonts, save templates, work in teams, build beautiful carousels of stories that you can portray onto different platforms, all from within our app. And one of the key points that really makes us stand out is that you can automate a lot of this with Zazu. So basically, we take all the work from you and we help you to generate this content automatically and in an instance. And currently, we're working a lot with publishers. So, for example, with NOZ or the Mainpost or Süddeutsche Zeitung, just to name a few here in Germany, are some of the key customers that we have, just because it's a very good target group for us, since stories work especially well when there's daily updates, when there's a lot of content that has to be or deserves to be shown, especially if it's in a visual format, so very image heavy and video heavy. And so that's why we've been prominently working with publishers in the European area. But actually, as a matter of fact, as we're speaking, we're also now branching out to other areas. So notably, e-commerce section is something very interesting to us, because I briefly mentioned it before, these web stories are very interactive. So that means there's a lot of opportunities for e-commerce and other brands to engage with their customers, not only through stuff like polls or quizzes that you might know from Instagram, but also through shopping tags where you can directly advertise products, through calls for newsletter subscriptions, and many other engaging features that really help brands, establish a close relationship with their customers. But yeah, most notably right now, it's news publishers, and hopefully soon we will also be able to expand much more heavily into the e-commerce sector.
Brilliant, brilliant. And in terms of team, how big is the team? Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we're roughly 8 people. We have a quite interesting dynamic in the sense that we have, not everybody's working directly with us. Some of them are working remote. And so what we're doing is we're trying to make it as obviously as open as possible. So we have partners that we work with that are helping us build this company, where we have a lot of tech expertise and a lot of experience sitting. And the beauty of that is for us to easily scale up and down our efforts as we need it. Sometimes there's a huge demand. There's projects like EU projects like Stadium that might require much more demand. There's other times where we might want to scale down a bit because our front end part is maybe already a bit further developed than the actual back end, or other way around. And so this flexibility is something that we value highly. But yeah, otherwise we have, of course, a couple of people here in Hamburg, and then the rest is remote.
Oh, great. I think it'll be interesting to dive into the reasons of why did you rebrand, because that's something that we touched upon in the previous episodes, and there will be a perfect kind of maybe a view from your perspective. And maybe what is more interesting for me to understand, was it a rebrand, also kind of redo of your product idea? So is it like a complete pivot that you did, or what was behind it?
Yeah, so it was not an easy decision. We thought a long time and a lot about it. Essentially, it boiled down to a bit of what you said as well. We raised the funding round in early 2021, and what we realized then is that there was a lot of work to do on the tech stack that we had with the existing application, a lot of things that had to be overhauled. And with all this fresh capital and the resources, what we decided to do is then really challenge our product completely from the ground up. We looked at all the competitors, we looked at where we are lacking clearly, we looked at all the client feedback, we looked at how they do things, how they set up scalable processes. We brought out external experts to help us envision a clear user experience. And at some point, we realized that there's such a big change happening in the company. So what we've been then building, with Zazu, at the point we didn't know yet that it was called Zazu and that we were doing this rebrand, but what we were building was so fundamentally different in terms of tech and the way it works and the way the user navigates in the software. Not in the core idea, the very core idea of web stories as a format remained the same, but pretty much everything around it changed. And alongside those changes, there's been a lot of team changes as well over the last year, and the name of Cutnut actually was from a distant past at that point, and we realized, okay, well, this is not just an update that we ship to the clients and say like, hey, by the way, now it's a little update and this is how it looks now. It was a complete interface change. It was a complete tech change. It was a complete team change, and also on the legal level, on like our company structure was slightly changed. And so we figured this is a really good time to leave the past behind us, indicate at the same time, to our clients and to the future, that this is a huge change, that this is something that we really take serious, and that we have really taken huge efforts here to provide the best tool out there, and that what we're doing here has significant impact on our tool and what we offer to our clients. And I think one of the aspects along with that was that, for example, before Cutnut was a desktop-based tool, so you would have to download it from the internet. You would open it like a desktop application. You would work on it like you would when you downloaded back in the day, like PowerPoint or Microsoft. And Zazu now is completely web-based. It's completely server-based, like any good SaaS software should be. We had our reasons back then, but that's a different topic. And ultimately we came to the conclusion, like, wow, what has happened here in this company over the last few months, and what will happen over the course of the next months and years is so significant that it's not just an update email. This is really a significant change, and we've for a long time been not too happy with name Cutnut, because again, it didn't quite fit into anything what we were doing. It's quite attached, and we went on a long brainstorm session about names, logos, ideations, and ended up with Zazu, which in itself came to be because, well, the first premise that we had was we didn't want to have the word story in our editor. We believe, first of all, our vision is bigger than medium to long run. And all of our competitors have somewhat of a story in their name, which we think was not the ideal way to go. And so we ended up with Zazu because Zazu was an inspiration from the Lion King. He's the right hand of the king. He helps the king keep control over his empire and delivers all the important messages. And basically, the king couldn't operate his whole empire without Zazu. And that's how we ended up with the name, and that's also how we came to the rebranding a bit.
Really interesting. You mentioned the team changes. I think I suppose that could be challenging. But what was the most challenging things about this whole rebranding and restructuring of the company? Maybe back then, if you look back and look at it, but and from the now perspective. For example, maybe it was very painful back then, but now you understand, okay, that was a good decision, and vice versa. Maybe you thought it was a good decision back then, and then now you understand maybe you should have done something differently.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a very tough process because, as I said, pretty much every component of our company changed. We had team changes. We had also our whole tech team changed. So we were working with another agency before. We had to, we separated from them. We had to find a new agency. We had to vet them. We needed to work them into the project. We had all this legal structure change, with new investors coming on board. There were also pooling agreements, ESOP agreements that were being formed and formulated to kind of, at the end, with the goal was to simplify the whole structure, but the way there was really challenging. And alongside with the rebranding, we had amazing designers that we had to coordinate and had to see how we will build this new platform. We had to register this name and the trademark, which all these processes in and themselves are or can be quite challenging already sometimes, especially like the whole like structural change in the legal side of things. Not to mention all the notary paperwork and lawyer back and forth. But all of that combined, that was really like a huge task that took quite a while to realize. And it was, at the time, it felt like it was way too much effort. Like in the sense that, like we were also restructuring our company. We were building this very big shareholder agreement. So the contract, we were revising all the terms. We were wanting to make sure that everything is set up for the future, that there is clear vesting schemes in place, that there's a fair visa pool in place, all these things for future employees, for future financing rounds. And at the time, it seemed like so much effort, and it was such a hassle really to coordinate with the lawyer what is possible, what is not. How do we deal with an old co-founder who for personal reasons wanted to exit? How do we do with the shares? What do we do with new incentives? Like, how can we make sure the cap table is right, and so on and so forth. And I think it was much more work than originally anticipated. And in the time, as I mentioned, it was really challenging. But looking back now, I'm really glad that we did it, because it was so necessary to set up our company structure in the right way and make sure that we are, prepared for the future. And again, not just the legal side, right? Also the tech side. We're so happy with the current team that we're having. Like, it took us a long time to vet this agency. Obviously, came through recommendations, and there was a lot of back and forth, and seeing how they were and how different from other agencies, and same with team members. But overall, I would say it really paid off. I realized in the process that the German law system for startups, although I heard it many times before, I experienced firsthand that this can sometimes be a real problem, and is really not that startup friendly in many areas. And that is something that really annoyed me, to be honest, because I think it's such a shame that it's still so difficult in Germany to like climb all these legal hurdles when it comes to establishing a company, or when it comes to changing structures, or just trying to build a company in general. And that was something that really stood out to me.
Yeah, really interesting. I think many of our listeners and viewers could identify with some of those challenges. We were facing that ourselves, and I just can attest that sometimes you think, wow, it's such a burden, and that's a mountain you could never climb. But then when you look back at this valley, you think, wow, it's much better here, from all the perspective, also from the team perspective. That's what we had in BotTalk as well, and also for product perspective and so on. You mentioned about you mentioned the good and the bad parts of being an entrepreneur and startup founder. I would love to dive into this. So what is misconceptions maybe that you think that the public out there think the startup founder life is all about?
One of the probably very common misconceptions, is that things are going well and everything is super easy, and there's one success story after next, when you don't have the full picture. I mean, I know that it's not just a startup problem, if you want to call it that. It's a more general way that people communicate, I guess. But what people on the outside see is, well, great, you got, well, in my case, you got Forbes 30 under 30, you got this big client, you did this rebranding, you got a financing round together. Well, fantastic. And this is all great. I mean, yes, it is fantastic, and these are the things that get me up in the morning. But there's so much beneath that. So many, well, at the end, so many failures, so many clients that declined, so many problems with the product, so many investors that said no, so many other things that we didn't get, so many crises that we had, that obviously don't come up there. And I think personally, it's really important to talk about that, to kind of destigmatize, if that's the word, this kind of thinking of I think it's a general thing that in the US, I would say they are quite much further down the road than we are. It's much more open to talk about failure and about fuck-ups and so on. And this is coming to Germany. It's becoming, or Europe generally, it's becoming more accepted. To struggle and to at the end ultimately maybe even not succeed. But I think there is still so much work to be done in order to really talk about these topics, because nobody is having this perfect path and everything is easy, and they just raise millions of euros and build a big team and exit and live happily ever after. It's such a struggle, and the more we can talk about it, the more important it gets. And I mean, there's tons of misconceptions, I think, out there when it comes to startups and entrepreneurial lifestyle. That's one of the most common ones. There's so many other ones. I think what some people don't realize is that as an entrepreneur, or as a founder, you usually tend to put yourself last, whether it comes to salary, whether it comes to free time, whether it comes to at the end, your well-being to some degree. And that's something also that I learned in a hard way, that you have to take that time for yourself, at least to some degree. Otherwise, nobody will be thanking you if you burn out.
We have a bit unstable connection. Sorry for that. But let's maybe dive into that a little bit more and set an example. You mentioned that there's a stigma around fuck ups, that only the bright side of the story gets told. Well, you have a chance to maybe select one of your favorite fuck ups that you can share with the audience in your journey. That maybe not the biggest one, but the one that will be fun to actually talk about.
Yeah, I mean, tons of fuck ups. Honestly, I feel like as a founder, or in many areas, but especially I think in a founder's life, basically every day more or less you get thrown into cold water. You get kind of challenged with new situations that you need to solve, which again, to me, and I would say to many founders out there, that's part of the exciting side of the job. That's exactly what I'm doing and what I love to do. I love the fact that I actually have to read legal contracts. I have to design them myself. I have to do sales negotiations. I have to do hirings. I have to maybe let people go, review performances. I need to build product. I mean, obviously I have team members and they're doing a much better job than I am at these things, but to a large degree, I'm still involved in these things. And I think that's the beautiful thing and beautiful side of it. But alongside with that comes obviously a lot of chance to fuck up, because oftentimes these things, although you read up and you ask around and you kind of try to make yourself confident in your decision, there's clearly a lot of room for error. And again, for me, like for us, there's tons of fuck ups. I think well, the first fuck up I mentioned briefly before, we decided to build our first product as a desktop version. What a terrible decision in retrospect. It was a lot of money that we spent on building a desktop-based software, only to realize down the road that this didn't make any sense. We had our reasons. I mean, back then it was what the client wanted. They wanted to have a desktop. They had like very high security standards. They couldn't use web apps. And so on. But in hindsight, this was a terrible decision and cost us a lot of money. Another fuck up, maybe just to give you another example, and we can dive deeper into one of them if you want, was our legal contract, in the founders structure. So, for example, in the first contract that we set up, we didn't take into account a proper vesting scheme. So people were more or less immediately vested and had their full amount of shares at the beginning, and that with one founder who had to leave again for personal reasons, that became a problem because he and we agreed on the terms and everything was fine, and we are still on very good terms. But the idea was that he would give back some shares as he left, keep a little bit of remaining shares, and then we would be able to redistribute those shares to new potential clients or investors. And the German law basically is pretty clear on this, that this is more or less impossible to gift shares. We made the mistake of thinking that this idea was so good, so great, that we couldn't tell many people about it because it would get stolen, and it would be something that everybody would copy because it's just so great. And well, spoiler alert, pretty much no idea out there is like that special that people will quit their jobs and just do it themselves right off the bat. And also, this was one of the biggest problems for us, because what we missed out on was all the feedback from people telling us whether it actually is good or whether it's not so great. And that was one of the very, very early stages of the company. And so that idea that we had back then actually completely changed to how the product is now, because at some point we then ended up obviously talking with clients when we presented the product, and we talked about what it is and how it works. Luckily back then we didn't have invested that much yet, but we realized, okay, this direction is completely wrong. The core of the concept of what we're doing then, yeah, that was good, but we have to turn to another direction to really meet the needs of the market. And that's how then CutNut was born, with this new idea, where we then made the subsequent fuck up of building it as a desktop software. And yeah, so it really goes through, and obviously, these fuck ups are terrible and costly and never nice to do, but at the same time, well, for one, I think they're unavoidable. It is just how it goes if you're building your own business. If you have to take risks, and this is what happens, there's always a chance that it turn south. And obviously, there's a huge learning curve that comes alongside with it. A lot of things. I still believe, I'm a strong believer that you probably learn the most from your mistakes. I mean, that's nothing new, but I really can vouch for that statement, because I feel like in my life I've learned a lot from the mistakes that I've made, much more than from the things I've done right. Because obviously the things that you do right, you do them, it works, and you kind of sign them off. So in your head, you're like, okay, I can forget it. I did it. It was perfect. And you don't have to challenge yourself that much in kind of doing a post-mortem, if you will, like analyzing what went wrong. And so again, like summarizing for me, tons of fuck-ups, whether it's legal fuck-ups, product fuck-ups, or anything else. But we wouldn't be where we are now if we hadn't done these steps, obviously. And I also think it helped me grow a lot as a person and understand a bit much more how to approach topics and how to, deal with these situations in general.
Great. I think wrapping it up, I think it will be very interesting to know what is the future of Zazu. So what is something, what is your vision behind, like maybe a couple of sprints ahead, but a bigger picture? Where do you see the company in couple of years? What is the great why that you are trying to solve maybe for the future?
What we have been seeing over the last few years, and what I think we'll continue to see, is this shift to a more visual communication style. It has happened on social media much faster than on any other website platforms. We see it now more and more with stories as a format emerging. It's visual first. Everything becomes more like snackable and bit-sized. Like attention span decreases. Everything has to be fast, clickable, and easily consumable, and it has to be thus very visual. And I think in this trend, like we believe that this trend will continue on for quite some time. Not necessarily with stories, which is again one of the reasons why we didn't want the name stories in our company name. But we believe that this visual trend will go on, and what our vision at the end is, is to help companies visualize the web and visualize content, and that goes, as I said, beyond stories. So that means any kind of immersive, interactive content that can be created and distributed. Of course, most notably for the open web, so for our own websites, newsletters, SMS, chats, whatever it may be, but of course also for social media. And so I would say in the short to midterm, the goal is rather focused, on providing the best experience when it comes to stories, and making sure that, this interactivity is something that companies and users can really benefit from, and really link the two much closer together. And in the long run, it is definitely, helping to power a more visual and dynamic web experience across different formats. And that's where we as Zazu are headed, and where we're trying to help and inspire businesses to create beautiful designs easily.
Exciting, very cool. Philipp, thank you so much for your time, for your interview, and for so many insights into the life of a starter. Where can people find you, maybe to follow up, ask you questions, and so on and so forth?
No, my pleasure. I mean, it's been great talking. Probably the easiest would be via LinkedIn. If you Google my name, that should be the easiest one. Otherwise, of course, if you go through the website, you can always reach us there. And I'm always open to talk. So if there's any questions or any people that struggle or have doubts, I'm happy to talk, because again, I've experienced many of them as well, and I will continue to, as this inevitable as a founder. And I think it's always valuable to share and to connect and exchange.
Perfect. Philipp, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.